Hey guys, welcome back to The Way podcast. I'm Susanna, and we've currently been in a series on failure. We've been calling it Failing Forwards, and we've had some guests on talking about their personal failures and how they've bounced back. But today we're going to kind of widen it and talk about the UK church and what happens when the church gets it wrong and the church fails, because it's filled with flawed humans that get it wrong sometimes, and we're going to be talking about how we can move forwards. And so I'm joined with my really good friend Aaron. He works for Fusion, which is a student charity, and we're going to be asking him some questions about his experience of church leadership and how we all can work together to make it more inclusive. I really hope you enjoy this episode. Hey Aaron, welcome to this podcast. I'm so excited to be chatting to you with these guys today. And yeah, firstly, just tell us a bit about you, about Fusion, and I guess how you came to lead in like predominantly white or like historically white church spaces.
For sure. Oh, it's so good to be with you guys. I'm based in Wolverhampton. I am married and recently married and moved up. But I work, like you mentioned, for a student mission charity called Fusion. And Fusion is passionate about seeing students meet Jesus and be plugged into the local church. Fusion's been doing that for 25 years. And for me, my heart is, and my role is to see the wider church in the UK be at the forefront of that mission. We want to see South Asian churches, Afro-Caribbean churches, Iranian churches, Chinese church in the UK be at the heart of that mission. And for me, I grew up in the South Asian church in the UK. So my dad's a pastor of a Tamil church in Liverpool, and I've been around South Asian Malayalam churches, and that's been my church kind of upbringing in the UK. But with Fusion, like you mentioned, I found myself in spaces that was predominantly white. And I think the first time I was in a room where I was the only leader who was from a different background was, it was, I don't know how to explain that feeling. It was strange, because I'm used to being in a room full of people that looked like me and, you know, grew up in that. And to be in a setting where I was the only person of color, I was the only leader, young leader, who was in a setting full of predominantly white leaders was strange. But also, I realized the kind of privilege I had to represent a community of people who weren't in that space or weren't contributing in that space. And I was like, I get to be here and I get to shape what's happening here. And Fusion and guys around me have been a massive help in kind of championing that out of me. I often felt like I didn't belong in some of those spaces. But I've had some great friends and leaders above me who've gone, listen, we need your voice here and you belong here. So that's been a bit of the story so far in terms of figuring that out.
I love that. And I think it's so cool what you're talking about, your voice being needed, because I think for me, especially when I first went to uni and I was looking for churches, I was looking at like whether there were people in the congregation that weren't white. I think just naturally when you go in a space, maybe you guys might look for other men in the room or whatever. And I was looking for other girls or other people that weren't white. And I think in the past year, that's gone from congregation to actually who's on stage. And I care more now about actually leadership, like who is shaping this space and who's got a voice here, who's got responsibility and authority here. What does leadership look like? And so I guess for you, what has been a bit of your kind of journey but also struggle with like specifically leadership and you finding confidence in your voice and that?
Really interesting when you talk about diversity of a room, because a room can look diverse because of the people in the room. But true diversity isn't just the room looking diverse, it's the people shaping it being diverse. And so I was like, I remember early days being in spaces with leaders, and one example was I was in a predominant kind of conference, and I was one of the guys leading the room, leading that space with another senior leader, and this kind of white senior leader walked into the room and kind of spoke to everyone, shook everyone's hand, spoke about what we needed to do. And I was like in the line of people kind of waiting to kind of chat about what we needed to do. And he spoke to the person next to me and just walked past me. And I remember thinking, okay, like in order to make the decision for what's happening in this room, I'm one of the persons shaping it. But I was just like, I was completely excluded in that conversation because he probably didn't realize like I was one of the leaders or didn't think of me as one. And then there's been spaces when I'm like, in Fusion, I'm really privileged by friends who I call friends and colleagues and leaders who've just non-stop been on my case. So one example is Miriam, who used to be in the UK, now leads Fusion USA. She came to a prayer gathering that we were doing for Fusion, and I, mostly in predominant white spaces, kind of put myself in the back of the room. I'm not near the front because I don't really see people like me in the room, so I kind of settle myself in the background and kind of blend in a little bit, or kind of keep myself to the corner. And I remember one time she came to the back of the room because she was about to lead a time, and she went, I need you at the front because I need you listening to what God is saying in the room. I want you praying, and we're going to do this together, so you need to be there. And Luke, who's our team leader, just came and put his hand around me and went, Aaron, you're a leader here, and we need your voice. And like, I've had some of these affirmations by these guys around me, and just thinking like, oh, this is a privilege. I get to do this, and my voice here matters. But also aware that that space isn't available everywhere. We don't always have that kind of people around us. So yeah, looking to, I guess for me, my heart is, what does it look like to create spaces where we are championing everyone's voice and no one feels like, they don't belong in this table or they don't have something to contribute, is modeling a culture and a leadership that means younger leaders can see, you know what, I'm welcome in this room, but also I get to contribute here. And that's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge.
No, I love that. Yeah, and I guess all of us, like, we're young leaders in our spaces. And so, I guess, like, for you, Kane, you, like, your family don't follow Jesus currently, and you, like, are the only Christian in your family, and your first experience of church. Talk to me about, like, how you felt not being white walking into church. Like, did you have any perceptions of what the room would look like or leaders would look like, and what was your experiences in that?
Yeah, I mean, the first time I came to church, I mean, I never, as you said, I never grew up as a Christian, never grew up going to church. So the churches that I've seen were churches like we're in today, like modern type of like brick churches. And I thought churches were just all white, just all older white people. And so when I stepped into my church, we're kind of like blown away to see like people our age, like myself, young, following Jesus. And it gave me, I guess, hope that I can actually follow Jesus and step into leadership, because I think being a young leader is challenging, it's hard, but when you have other people that's the same color as you, that kind of like represent, like the kingdom of God and then heaven, obviously when we get to heaven, it's not just gonna be black people or white people, it's gonna be multi-racial people, and that's God's heart. And so when I step into a church that, that is like that, I'm like, wow, like this is the heart of God. He's not just for a singular people, but it's for everybody. And even now, when I'm leading my small group, I'm not just focused on the white people or the people that look like me. I actually want to have people in the small group that is multiracial, from different backgrounds. I think it just brings unity as well.
That's right.
And I think it's so important, as you said, just creating a church that is unity, not just in skin color, but all nationalities, and just showing the heart of God.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Wow, I love that. It's so true. Like, I love that picture of like heaven, that actually that is God's heart. That's what heaven will be like, every nation and tribe. And that's just, that's so powerful.
Just want to break into song.
Mate, every
nation and tribe. Do you know what I mean? I love it, bro.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Jesse, mate, you're white. And we love that. We love that. As a white person, like, what's your experience been of church and I guess leadership? Has it been diverse? Has it not? How does that impact you? How do you see that?
Man, it's interesting. So I grew up in Brighton, which is generally a pretty white town, but my church just thrived in diversity.
Wow.
But not in terms of like the leaders, which was fascinating. And my church was intentional, like in terms of raising up and bringing more like ethnic people on to preach, but generally like they go through a process of going through eldership before preaching and stuff like that, and so they compromised on that, and they had a black guy called Toby come up and preach even though he wasn't an elder, which was sick. But like in terms of paid leadership, there was one Indian guy out of 15, and that's it.
Wow.
And yet it's one of the most diverse churches in Brighton.
So good.
And it's fascinating to me, and I almost wonder, I know we talked about, I mean, you just shared a minute ago, Aaron, about how it's what goes on behind the room as well as in the room, which is so important. But my question would be like, even behind the room, if their heart's like in the right place to create a welcome space, can you create, a welcoming, diverse space?
Great question.
Great question. And the root of that question is if the heart's in the right place. And I think that's exactly it. One of the things that's happened in our country, well, globally, over the past few years is what's happening in America and what's happened here, what's happened wider, has woken up the church to an issue that's always been an issue.
Yeah.
And so we can always talk about racial justice as a state thing, like, oh, come on, we need to fix it in the world. Like, there's so much of this going on. But predominantly, I think if the church gets it right, the state gets it right. If the church models it, we become the beacon of light and hope to reflect what is possible when we talk about a picture of heaven. So is it possible for us to see that happen? Of course. Is there examples of that across the UK? Of course there is. And it's a gift, right? When you have a diverse body of Christ on a Sunday and you go in and you've got kind of we've got African aunties and Indian grandmas and English people. And it's incredible when you look at a church building like that. And even if the leadership isn't, and people feel like they belong, is incredible. And I think the next part of that journey is, well, how do we help people feel like they can contribute to the shaping of the church? So when we talk about behind the stage, if the heart's in the right place, what we will do is go, well, this is amazing that we have this leadership team that has one Indian in it, for example, or one person from a different background. But we want to see more people contribute. How do we do that? And I think it's intentionally going on that journey. And often the issue is we look for leaders. We often notice leaders that look like us. So you're quick to notice leadership in someone that models similar characteristics to you. So you'll go, oh my God, you know what? That person's carrying something in him. This person or she's like this. And it's often people like us. It's often harder. And what we've noticed with students and student leaders raising up, we do that a lot with Fusion with the local church. We see people from a white background or young white leaders, male or female, when they look at a leadership that's predominantly white, they're like, I feel called to leadership, I want to step up. They will come and put themselves forward because they're like, I can shape this room and I feel like I've got gifting in me. And it's often noticed and affirmed, so they contribute. But you'll have an African student in the room or a Chinese student in the room who go, I feel like I can contribute, but I will not put myself forward. And that's not just like because of what they see. It's also cultural. They're not going to be, they will not put themselves forward unless they're invited. So like when we talk about like, how do we invite more people in? We've got to go. We've got to create a space to go, listen, I'd love to see you shape this. Even if it's not, become a leader or become an elder or become this. How can we see your voice contribute? How we create community here, or how we do mission, and how when people feel like, you know what, I'm not just a stranger in this family, I'm family. And there's a difference between being a stranger in a house and a family member, right? Like if you're a family in a house, you do the cleaning up and you've got to wash the dishes and you've got to put it away. Where if you're a guest in a house, you don't really have to. It's how do we make people in the community, in the church community, feel like they're family? That they're like, I want to help shape how we go and where we go and what we do. And it's how do we go on that journey of making that happen? Is I think the invitation to the church in the time we find ourselves in.
Well, the answer's kind of in the question. How do you invite people in? You invite them.
That's it.
It's like, it's brilliant. Thanks,
that's I love that. And I love that basically what we're saying is like Jesus belongs to the world.
That's
like
it,
and I think maybe part of the failure of the UK church historically is that Jesus became this thing maybe for Europeans or Westerners, or he was used in the wrong way, or he was kind of weaponized. But actually, like, Jesus was Middle Eastern, he was a Jew, he had probably brown skin, and he belongs to the world. And I love that we get to share, like we get to be generous with him.
So predominantly in the UK, we know that majority of the churches are white churches, but there are some churches that are Afro-Caribbean, Chinese, some other countries as well. Aaron, what's your stance on that?
When we think about our communities in the UK, it is rich and diverse, right? Like you could walk down a high street here, or London is a beautiful example of that. Is we are surrounded by the nations at our doorstep. But when we think about the church in the UK, and we talk about failure of the church in the UK, it's interesting when we talk about reflecting the communities that we're based in, and often it doesn't happen. But when we talk about the church in the UK is beautifully diverse and rich. I'm thinking about the Afro-Caribbean church in the UK. It's huge. The Chinese church in the UK is rich and growing a lot because of the amount of international students and people coming from Hong Kong because of what's happening there. And Iranian church globally is the fastest growing church in the world, and what God's doing there is phenomenal. And that all is reflected in the UK. But you're right, like we often don't see the unity in that. We don't share spaces together, so we're unaware of each other. It's interesting when we talk about community, right? When we talk about like how do you and me change this? How can we play a part as young leaders to see this narrative change? And we're often quick to go to strategies or formulas or what can we do systematically? And we do need this, by the way. I'm not knocking those. But I think in order for us to see systemic change in community, change has to begin with you and me. Yeah. And one of the things I used to say is, in order for us to see changes in our society, we need to see a change in our table. Like, who is around my dining table at home? Who am I sharing meals with? Is my dining table or my coffee table diverse? Yes. If it really isn't, then I don't know what I'm trying to do to change my church or my community. And it's interesting. I grew up in Liverpool. I moved to the UK when I was an 11-year-old kid to Liverpool, and I was part of a Tamil church, a South Indian church. My dad pastors the church, and we speak that language, we worship in that language, and that's my church upbringing in the UK. But the first time I went to someone's house that wasn't Indian was 12 years after being in the UK. Wow. The first time I shared a meal with someone who wasn't Indian or who was not from an ethnic background was 12 years after being in the UK. And for people in the East generally, I can speak for Indians, building community around the table with food is just how we do it. Every Sunday for us in church, we had tea, some snacks, or if not food. It's just how we did church. And like the way we built relationships is by eating together. The way I knew you, I will get to know you, is to say, would you come to my house for dinner? Like that's the way I'd build community. And so we're like, how do we build community? Like, what can we do in our churches? What can we do in our city? And we're like, actually, what can I do in my home? It's a great place to start. Like, what can I do in my flat? Or what can I do in my house? How can I have people around me who I can learn from? And when we talk about like people that we share community with, one of the ways people feel really honored and celebrated is when they get to speak about their culture. It's incredible. Like you could have an Asian student or Asian young person in your church who's predominantly quiet the whole time. When we do our socials and when we do our gatherings, tell them to do a bring and share. Tell them to bring a food from their community. Watch how they come alive. Because they get to tell you a bit about who they are. And they get to teach you. They get to give you a part of them. For the first time, they're like, I get to contribute here. So I think when we talk about building kind of a diverse church, the big C church is diverse. It will be. The prayer of Jesus in John 17 is that the church, the disciples of God will be one, he says, just as you and I are one, Father, let them be one. Why? So that the world may know that you sent me. The way the world will know that Jesus was here, died and rose again and is the Messiah of the world is in the unity that they see of the church. And like that's the prayer. And that's what we get to go after. And that's why we're talking about this, right? And that's why we're passionate about this, because we're like, we don't just want to like create things that is external. The change has to begin with me. It has to start in my house and the spheres of influence I have. And that's the way we see shared spaces. And I think to finish it, in order for us to see this happen, we've got to repent a little bit and actually go, we don't have all the answers. Like actually there's a bit of humility to go, we don't have all the answers, but we want to learn. We want to be in spaces with people we can learn from. And I think that's the invitation for us to be one church, whatever that looks like in our time. And that's what we're going for. So.
Wow. Gosh. Yeah. It's huge. I love that because like who Jesus ate with was so profound. Like when he eats with people, he chooses to say like, look, I'm equal to you. And the strategy around who was around his table angered the Pharisees and angered the people that were stuck in their religion. And I think that's something so countercultural that we can do, because I guess in wider society, people do have friendship groups that are just like them and look like them, but the church is the place, like you said, that we can change the narrative and set what society looks like. And I guess it kind of made me think about how like you have like moved cities recently, Jesse, and you've moved to London. And I guess for you, I don't know, I just felt like it was a bit similar of like you've moved somewhere new and you're sticking into community and what your community looks like. And I think for a lot of like immigrants, we move country and everything is new and we're rebuilding community. And so I guess for you, like, are there any lessons you've learned around welcoming people and like being welcomed yourself and how maybe we could apply that to this?
It's fascinating because, it's fascinating seeing the process because I've moved and we talked a lot about sticking to what you know, and I've landed in one of the one of the whitest churches in London, and even though that's not what I've grown up with,
Right.
Like I've grown up listening to gospel, all music's but you know it's generally not my norm, and yet it's what I've landed in. It strikes some questions, and I'm not quite sure what I'd do. I think I did have to, moving to a new city, it's interesting, I did have to kind of put myself out there a little bit. But that's what you spoke on earlier about how it's easier for me to stick myself out there in front of a white guy. Whereas for someone of colour, it's not as easy because it's not in comfort. I don't know, I guess, sorry, I've just got more questions rather than answers.
No, go for it.
But like, I know a couple of years ago when our church started growing diversity-wise much more, and I began to get a bit more, ingrained in the culture and understand more and learn a lot more. It was very fun. Like, it's so fun, isn't it? But I remember like 14-year-old me, I'd struggle to always invite around my more diverse friends or ethnic friends because part of me's a little scared that I might say something wrong. And like, there's a little bit of tiptoeing around, like, and that's the case with anything. It's like I could say something wrong to a white friend who's got some trauma and something else, and like, But I don't know. How do you gain confidence in sometimes places of discomfort in terms of inviting out friends? Like, how can you be confident that it's all right to say the wrong thing sometimes and mess up and grow through that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How can you encourage a 14-year-old? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. The fear of getting something wrong often stops us from doing something in the first place. And the only way we'll ever grow, this applies to anything in life, to learn anything, the only way we grow is when we just have a go. So when we talk about those kind of moments where you're like, I'm scared of having them and then me offending them, I'm like, well, we won't know what it looks like to have them if we never do it in the first place. So the answer kind of, in that way, is just, let's just have a go at it. It might be messy. Family is messy. Like, we'll never have true family if we were looking for perfection. Like, when we're talking about our own families, it's never perfect around the table when we have family gatherings. I'm an Indian family gatherings are wild. Like, someone will say something, like someone will annoy someone, and like the aunties are shouting, kids are running around, it's a mess. But the gold is that. It's not perfect.
That's great.
It's not all polished and perfect and everyone's saying all the right things. It's about, we're all family here, we belong, and this is rich because we're like this. So I'd say, to anyone listening is like, well, how do I start? Well, I'm scared of what I might do. My encouragement is have a go. Have a go. Because I think what we'll learn is far greater than what we will lose.
Wow.
What we are standing to gain is far greater than what we could lose. Because what we could gain is family. Like, what we're looking to gain is, and we met today, right? But since the time I met you, the way you addressed me was brother. And that's beautiful because you and I have never met. And this is the first time we've seen each other. But we are brothers because that's just the way you look at me and that's the way you invite me. So I leave today going, I've got a brother in Jesse. Right? Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's rich. And that's rich.
You're my brother.
And that's beautiful.
Wow.
And that wasn't because we were like, well, how is Aaron going to be? How is Jesse going to be? Like, what do I say? How do I call him? We just went, family is universal. The language of family is universal. So you notice in Indian churches, again, I'll talk for example, we would never call any elders like by their name. Everyone's an auntie. Everyone's an uncle. Like everyone's family, like African church is the same.
Yeah.
Aunties this, and everyone has a say in your life, right? You don't know them, you're not family, but everyone is treated as family.
Yes.
And I think if we were to live in that way, and I think historically UK was like that.
Yeah.
We were massive in terms of community. We did life in our neighborhoods. We shared food together. Like when I'm thinking about the UK, historically, like people in the streets would go to their neighbors to get some tea, or if you ran out, you'd get sugar from your neighbor, and like that's how we are. But I think over the years we've lost that. We've lost the sense of like my neighbor is my neighbor.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes I'm like, I need to love my neighbor.
Yeah.
And my neighbor isn't someone who looks like me. My neighbor is the person in my close community, whoever that is. And I'm like, well, what does it mean to love my neighbor?
Yeah.
It's to invite them into family.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm
So
like,
good.
to the 14-year-old Jesse, I'm like, have a go.
Yeah, literally.
Invite them.
Man.
And what you might have gained that day in having a go was like, learn something about our culture and community. Maybe got a family and a friend.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we stand to gain. That is what we all stand to gain in doing that.
So good, man.
Yeah.
So good.
There's a really cool resource out there called the Culture Map, where Aaron Nayagam, she's done this research on how different cultures connect. And there's loads that I won't go into detail. But one of the things that's really cool is how she talks about how people build trust.
Wow.
And this is phenomenal because in that research, she says the US and UK probably fall on this side. They build trust based on task-based relationship, meaning you do something for me and you do what you say you'll do. I can trust you now because you did your task. Nigeria, India, China, they fall on the other end of the scale, which is relationship-based trust.
Yeah.
So they're like, I don't care if you do what you say you're gonna do. If I don't have a relationship with you, I won't trust you.
Wow.
That's good, yeah.
So it's amazing because you then think about, when we think about how we build trust with someone, we're like, if someone turns up and they said they were going to do the thing that they said they were going to do, American churches, UK churches are like, we can trust them.
Yeah.
The Indian church is like, don't care what you do. If I don't have you around my house and I get to know you, now I trust you and I have a relationship with you, I trust you. I'll do what I want. So people will come, not because you do an event and you do it well.
Yeah.
People will come because they know you. So I'm like, how do we then create those spaces when we talk about one church that is bigger than the building?
Yeah.
And I think we will be one day. But I think there are opportunities for us to share space that are kind of presented to us every day that maybe we miss.
Yeah, that's gold. That's so good. And I think, Aaron, for me, you've been a real mentor figure in my life where I've been like, in floods of tears sometimes with you being like, oh my gosh, like everyone's white and it hurts. So I guess, what would you say to, I think, the young non-white leader that maybe is in a predominantly white space, maybe is in an all, Asian, African church? How would you encourage them for those moments where it's frustrating and it just feels like, I don't belong here?
Yeah.
So good.
Hallmarks of a pioneer or those very things, right? Is that we're having to pave a way. And I remember that was one of the first things I said to you, that is that these struggles that you're walking through now are going to mean there's going to be a whole heap of leaders coming behind us who are going to not have to face some of the challenges that you've had to.
Yeah, wow.
So my encouragement to a young leader listening to this is your leadership matters. Your voice matters. Even if right now it feels like you're not making a contribution or making an impact in the way you perceive to be successful. Everything you're doing today means tomorrow someone else doesn't have to walk through what you're walking through today.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when in the 6 years of being at Fusion and have had to question my leadership many a times, and I've had to have people kind of remind me I belong, the thing that's kept me going is this: Aaron, every time you stand, every time you speak, wherever it is that God's calling you to, remember that because of you standing here, someone watching this, seeing this, hearing about this, has the confidence to go for it for themselves.
Thank you guys so much for joining us on today's podcast. Aaron, thank you so much for being our special guest today. We appreciate you, and Susanna and Jesse. It's been real. Make sure you guys follow us on all of our social media accounts at The Way UK, and we'll see you next time.